Number 1.
A 700-year-old murder mystery may have finally been solved, and scientists got the scoop from a mummy's poop. In 1329, Cangrande della Scala suddenly became sick and died at the age of 38. The Italian nobleman was ruler of Verona and had won control over the city of Treviso just days before his death. The sudden death was preceded by vomit and diarrhea with fever that, according to written documents, he had contracted a few days before by drinking from a polluted spring, researchers wrote in the February edition of the Journal of Archaeological Science. But there had long been whispers that the ruler was poisoned. And in 2004, nearly 700 years after his death, scientists exhumed Cangrande's body from its stone sarcophagus and found a remarkably well-preserved natural mummy. The researchers gave the medieval leader a modern autopsy and found the remains of fecal matter inside Cangrande's rectal ampulla. In 2007, the research team explained their findings to the World Congress on Mummy Studies. There is a large quantity of pollens of chamomile, black mulberry, and, totally unexpected, of foxglove, Digitalis sp. Perhaps purpurea, in the feces, they said in their presentation. In the Middle Ages, chamomile was largely used as a sedative and antispasmodic, and black mulberry as astringent. On the contrary, foxglove was considered only a poisonous plant. The concentrations were enough to be toxic, and the researchers explained that they believe Cangrande was fed the foxglove in the guise of a medical treatment. One of Cangrande's physicians was hung by his successor Mastino II, emphasizing on this possibility, they said. That's not all they learned. Cangrande was just under 5'7", had brown curly hair, and may have suffered from a number of ailments. His lungs showed evidence of coalworkers' pneumoconiosis, aka black lung, probably because of smoky rooms heated by large braziers. He also may have suffered from psoriasis and chronic sinusitis, and there's evidence of mild arthritis, perhaps due to his active lifestyle. Cangrande may have even had tuberculosis, which was common at the time, according to the presentation. But it was the remains of foxglove in his feces that stand out the most. It was a real surprise, study leader Gino Fornaciari, a paleopathology researcher from the University of Pisa, told LiveScience earlier this week. Fornaciari and his team write in the new study that it's possible Cangrande was given the foxglove by mistake, but they believe it's far more likely that he was poisoned. The most likely hypothesis on the causes of death is that of a deliberate administration of a lethal amount of Digitalis, they wrote. LiveScience speculates that the culprit may have been a rival ruler or his ambitious nephew, the very same Mastino II who had Cangrande's physician hanged. In addition to being ruler over key parts of northern Italy, Cangrande is remembered today as a friend and protector of Dante Alighieri, who had been exiled from Florence. In return, Dante praised Cangrande in his writing. His generous actions will eventually be known, so that even his enemies will not be able to stay silent about them, the poet wrote in Paradiso.
Number 2.
Jean Marie Townsend was described as a young woman with a very respectable reputation. The director of the company that Jean worked for said she was a very sweet girl, intelligent and charming. She was also described as having been a friend of stage and screen stars, and it was also noted she rarely drank. On the evening before Jean's death, she was at the Pyramid Club with friends. The club was close to where she worked. She left the club around 11 p.m. to go home. On the morning of September 15, 1954, Jean's body was discovered on wasteland in Ruislip, Middlesex, UK. She strangled with her black and gold scarf and found less than a mile from where she lived around 7 a.m. by a worker. Jean's body was located in tall grass, but part of the grass, which was allegedly over 6 feet tall in some areas, was flattened, so maybe she was dragged there. When her body was found, her clothes were still on. Her stockings and shoes were removed and located with her purse, all of which were nearby. No scratches were found on her body, and there didn't appear to be any evidence of a sexual assault. The rain had dampened her clothing, and the black and gold scarf she was strangled with was still on her neck. Interestingly, when her parents were on their way to work around 6:30 a.m., they would have traveled past their daughter's body. The murder location was near a new community center that was close to a US Air Force base, and there was some scrutiny that maybe she was murdered by someone from the base who might have left the country to cover up the crime, but the police didn't support that notion. On the night of Jean's death, a witness indicated she heard a woman screaming help close to midnight and then an argument between a couple of men. When the two men were located, they weren't able to help the police. Because Jean had a membership to the Pyramid Club, which was defined as the Chain Letter Introduction Club, she was dubbed as the Pyramid Girl Murder. Remember when chain letters used to be popular, where you had a list of names and you mailed $1 to the person at the top, then you rotated the names up and added yours to the bottom of the list. During the investigation, Jean's steps were traced as far as how she might have traveled home. Allegedly, she was seen leaving the train station around 11:45 p.m. or thereafter, when the street lights turn off at midnight, and then walking home alone. There was speculation as to whether or not she was then given a ride or pulled into a car. The ticket collector at the train station recalled seeing Jean get off the train, which could make him the last person to see her. The police looked for the friends that she was with during the evening. They learned she met up with two of her girlfriends and went to a place called Piccadilly and then to the Pyramid Club. Each member of the club had a subscription to pay for, which was designed like a chain letter. It sounds like a pyramid-type scheme to make money. The police later informed pyramid partygoers that this chain letter method, including the subscription to enter the club, could be a way for untrustworthy people to become involved. After Jean's murder, this pyramid method ended in London. The police indicated they were confident that Jean didn't know her killer. They thought Jean might have been pulled into a car after she left the train station, was strangled, and then dragged to where she was found. I thought it was interesting that while the investigation was ongoing, that local movie theater screens would include messages asking whether anyone was near the location. On Thursday afternoon, a man with a high forehead and an American accent came into the office in civilian clothes and deposited a red check shirt with bloodstains on both sides of the front. He also handed in a pair of gray gabardine trousers with bloodstains on the front of both legs. The trousers were torn. This fellow had scratches over his eye and on his cheek, and they were fresh. I said to him, "Where have you been, in a scrap?" And he said, "Sort of." The police requested information regarding two men who were in the area on September 11 and 13, 1954 in a red small sports car that was allegedly spotted by 6 women. The police were trying to locate 3 cars so they could speak to the drivers. The area where Jean was murdered became known as Murder Mile. Patrol squad volunteers were organized to ensure girls were safe in the area when walking home. There had been other incidents of young women saying they had been approached. 2 such women said that the men who had accosted them ran off after they screamed, and one of these incidents was similar to what happened to Jean. She too was thrown on the grass and an attempt was made to strangle her with her scarf. Her purse had also been left to the side. One 22-year-old woman said that about 10 days before Jean's murder, she was approached and attacked by a man who had tried to strangle her. Other women too told the police about attempts made against them close to the area where Jean was killed. With mothers having curfews on their daughters, they weren't supposed to be walking alone after dark. Girls were also traveling in groups. On September 7, 1956, another woman by the name of Diana Sutty was also murdered by her scarf and dumped from a car. Her purse, shoes, and other belongings were near her body. It was similar to how Jean was killed. Jean's case is still talked about and remains a cold case that may never be solved. A church built in 1967 now stands on the land where Jean's body was found.
Number 3.
It was the summer of 1862 when Jessie McPherson was found stabbed to death in her home, half naked and lying in a pool of her own blood. The only evidence left at the crime scene was the presence of 3 small, bloody footprints. When Jess's coat was discovered in the home of Jessie McLachlan, pictured above, the victim's best friend found herself charged with one of the most hideous murders that Glasgow had ever seen. Christiana Brand's Heaven Knows Who provides a chilling true account of the Sandyford murder case and McLachlan's sensational 19th-century trial. She lay on her face near the foot of the bed, which was to the right as you came through the door. Her body was half-clad in a semet, a shift and a woolen polka, a sort of knitted vest, a chemise or short petticoat and a short woolen dressing gown, but these had been pulled up over her head and shoulders, leaving the lower half of her body bare. A piece of carpet had been thrown down over the upper part. About her head, face and hands there were 40 wounds. An iron cleaver was found in a drawer of the kitchen dresser. The bedroom was in confusion. The bed appeared to have been slept in. The bedclothes were stained with blood and had been pulled down into a heap at the foot of the bed. A blood-stained sheet which looked as though it had been taken off the bed was rolled up under the washstand. It was rather damp. Under one of the tables near the body was rolled the silver cruet stand from the dining room upstairs, minus its bottles. There was blood all about the room, and close to the window wall 3 bloody prints of a naked left foot. And a chest that had held Jessie McPherson's clothes stood open, the few remaining contents thrown back, all stained with blood, as though, said Dr. Fleming at the trial, some bloody hand had been at work among them. All Jess's best clothes had disappeared, and her everyday dress was gone from its hook, a cinnamon-colored dress trimmed with blue velvet, but with no flounces. In the lobby between the bedroom and the kitchen there were smears of blood. There was blood on the kitchen sink, and in a chest of drawers in old Fleming's wardrobe room across the passage were 2 shirts, newly dressed, spotted with blood. But more fantastic still, the floors of the kitchen and the bedroom and the stone flags of the lobby had recently been washed. The kitchen floor was the drier, but it still looked damp. The lobby flagstones were absolutely moist. On the wooden floor of the bedroom, outside the part that had been washed, there were 3 bloody imprints of a small naked foot. And most fantastic of all, the face, neck and chest of the corpse appeared to have been washed. This is not fiction. This all happened on a Monday evening, July 7, 1862. Later that evening the police asked Mr. Fleming if anything more was missing than the clothes from the chest downstairs. He had not thought of looking and would hardly know, for he was not sure what had been taken to the summer residence at noon. They went into the dining room, that room where, at 4 o'clock on the Saturday morning, the 3 merry wedding guests had seen the gasolier alight and there found the sideboard standing open. The day-to-day silver spoons and forks were gone. All that remained was a single silver teaspoon which was found in a cup on a shelf in the kitchen. The silver teapot and stand and the silver cream jug were still in the sideboard. There were 2 other silver tea services in the house, and so were the glass bottles from the cruet which lay tumbled under the table in the murdered woman's room below. Mr. Fleming indicated the tea set. They might have gotten away with that, he said, if they had been wanting plunder, and the detectives agreed that an old thief, an accustomed thief, would have taken away more than was taken. One not practiced in thieving might leave something behind. On the other hand, to have left a plated thing like the empty cruet stand seemed to police officer Jeffrey like the trick of an old thief, and altogether the whole thing was a mystery that they could not see the bottom of. He had not, he candidly admitted at the trial, seen the bottom of it even yet. However, certain articles, both silver and silver-plated, were missing after all: 6 silver toddy ladles, a silver fish slice, a silver soup divider, a plated sauce spoon, etc., etc. The full list lay already in the keeping of Mr. Lundy's pawn. 2 days earlier Mrs. MacDonald had raised £6.15 on it. So the night dragged on. Under the yellow-blue light of the gas lamps or holding their candles close, the doctors and policemen crouched over the dead body or patted with probing fingers and eager eyes about the house. Police officer Campbell had got hold of a little bit of stick and was measuring the bloody footprints on the bedroom floor. He compared their length by putting his bit of stick against the soles of the dead woman's feet. The stick was quite appreciably shorter. So the footprints had not been made by Jessie McPherson, but he thought they were those of a woman. In the early hours of the morning Mr. Fleming took his father and son with him and sought refuge elsewhere, turning over his home to the authorities. One by one the doctors and policemen packed away their instruments and snapped shut their notebooks and crawled home to take a few hours' rest before it all began again next day. A uniformed man or 2 left in charge of the closed and shuttered house, dawn breaking and the birds beginning to sing in the trees along South Chihel Street. And alone in her bedroom, lying there half naked, with her secret still held close in her wounded hands, Poor Jessie McPherson lay as she had lain for 3 full days and 3 full nights, and would lie at least 2 days more till they had done with her.
Number 4.
On March 11, 1911, Herbert Fletcher DeCou was murdered. He had been part of a team from the United States excavating an ancient Greek city known as Cyrene, which is located in what is now the country of Libya. The killing actually caused something of an international incident, one that involved the United States, Turkey, and Italy. The shooting of DeCou happened in the morning. It wasn't until 2004, after an autopsy using modern technology was performed, that the world came to learn that Italian nobleman Cangrande della Scala was indeed murdered. For almost 7 centuries, it was assumed the nobleman's death, which occurred in 1329, was an accident. As it turned out, it is likely that the Lord of Verona was deliberately administered a fatal amount of digitalis. Digitalis, also known as foxgloves, is a genus of roughly 20 species of perennials, biennials, and shrubs. The word is often used to describe drug preparations extracted from one of the plants of the genus. The camp's director was told the DeCou, who was on the way to a dig site, was shot twice by 3 Arabs who escaped on horseback. It is likely that the so-called assassins, whoever they were, did not intend to kill DeCou. There was no real way they could have known he would end up in front of the wall behind which they were hidden. The Italo-Turkish War of 1911, in which Libya became a colony of Italy, was about to start. Therefore, it is highly possible the assassins just wanted to kill an American and mistook DeCou for someone else, possibly the director of the excavation team. There was also talk of DeCou attempting to woo a married woman from the area, resulting in his being murdered by a jealous husband. Regardless, while it is entirely possible that various governments around the world actually know who killed DeCou and why, it is unlikely that information will ever be shared with the general public.
Number 5.
Marion Gilchrist was a wealthy 83-year-old woman who lived in a well-appointed first-floor flat at Queen's Terrace, West Princes Street, Glasgow, then one of the most sought-after addresses in the city. On returning to the flat around 7 p.m. with the evening edition and a few other purchases, 21-year-old Helen Lambie opened the door with her key. At this point, a mystery man emerged from the bedroom, ran past her, and rushed downstairs. Lambie found the old woman lying in a pool of blood in the dining room. She ran out of the flat screaming and alerted a neighbor called Adams, who had also seen the mystery man run off. The neighbor called a doctor who examined the body and realized that a broken chair leg had been used to kill her. A wooden box where the victim kept her private papers had been forced open and the contents scattered on the floor. Although several valuable pieces of jewelry lay on a dressing table, only one article, a diamond crescent brooch, was missing. Both Lambie and Adams described the man they had seen rushing from the house as aged between 25 and 30, 5 feet 8, slim, dark-haired, clean-shaven, and wearing a light gray overcoat and a cloth cap. There was a third witness, passerby Mary Barrowman, 14, who had seen the same man flee. The public was shocked by such a savage attack on an old lady in her home, and there was pressure on police to make a quick arrest. Around the same time, a German man had been trying to sell a pawn ticket for a diamond crescent brooch. He was Oscar Slater, who had arrived in Glasgow about a month before the murder. He was with Andrée Antoine, a French woman, and they lived nearby in a flat at St. George's Road, under the name Anderson. Slater claimed to be a dentist and also described himself as a dealer in precious stones. In fact, he was a professional gambler who lived by his wits and who spent most of his time in snooker halls and clubs. He was 39, 5 feet 8, well-built, and had a short black mustache. Detectives then discovered that Slater and his female friend had already left for Liverpool on Christmas Day, 4 days after the murder, which seemed highly suspicious. The following day, the couple sailed on board famous liner the Lusitania for New York. This information was immediately passed to police in New York, and an application was made for Slater's extradition. When news of Slater's arrest reached Glasgow, Detective Inspector Piper, of the City of Glasgow Police, left for New York, taking the 3 key witnesses Lambie, Adams, and Barrowman with him. On their arrival, the New York police held an identification parade. Both women identified him as the man seen running from the house on the night of the murder. Adams was not so sure and would go no further than to say that Slater resembled the man. Slater insisted on returning to Glasgow to stand trial in a bid to clear his name. The case began before Judge Lord Guthrie in the High Court in Edinburgh on May 3, 1909. Both Lambie and Barrowman again named Slater as the man seen running from the house on the night of the crime. Adams stuck to what he had said in New York, that he could not positively identify the accused. Public interest in the trial was intense, and there were queues each day for seats in the public gallery. The prosecution savaged Slater's character, and despite a vigorous defense, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Slater was shocked by the outcome and shouted from the dock, "I know nothing about the affair, absolutely nothing." Judge Lord Guthrie donned his black cap and sentenced him to be hanged from the neck until dead. However, Slater's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment after public protests about the verdict. In the aftermath of his conviction, there were calls for the case to be reopened and the conviction overturned. One of his keenest supporters was Sherlock Holmes author and Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle. In an 80-page publication titled The Case of Oscar Slater, he publicly questioned the verdict. He said there was not a single piece of evidence to link Slater with Gilchrist. Doyle also claimed that the New York identity parade had been rigged by police. The brooch that Slater had pawned turned out to belong to a lady friend and was not the one stolen from Gilchrist. Slater's trip to America was found to have been planned months ahead and was not a desperate escape. None of his clothing matched witnesses' descriptions of the killer or carried any traces of blood. Doyle interviewed new witnesses, hunted for fresh evidence, and even paid some of Slater's lawyers' fees. There was another man even more convinced of Slater's innocence, and he bravely put his own career and reputation on the line to prove that Slater was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. Detective Lieutenant John Thomson Trench had been in the City of Glasgow Police for 21 years and was the holder of the King's Police Medal for meritorious service. His own belief was that Gilchrist had known her killer and that it was not a random stranger who murdered her. He also believed that Lambie knew more of the murder than she was letting on. 5 years after Slater had been sent to prison, Trench told Glasgow lawyer David Cook of his concerns. Cook forwarded statements to the Secretary of State for Scotland, who ordered an independent investigation by a sheriff. For a police officer to disclose information acquired during the course of his duties to any person outside the police service, even a respected city lawyer, was a serious breach of the police regulations. On September 14, 1914, despite his distinguished record, he was sacked from the force in disgrace for leaking information on the case to the lawyer and died in disgrace 5 years later. Meanwhile, Slater spent his time in prison doing hard labor in Peterhead Jail, wondering if he would ever be freed. In 1925, a fellow prisoner by the name of William Gordon was freed from the same prison, having served his sentence. Crucially, he had smuggled out a note from Slater to Doyle which he had concealed under his dentures. The message, which can still be found in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, was a plea for help from Slater. Inspired by this act of bravado and ingenuity, Doyle once again started campaigning, and this time newspapers took up the story. Witnesses who had previously testified against Slater came forward to confess they had been coached by police officers into identifying the suspect. On November 14, 1927, Slater was finally released by the Secretary of State for Scotland pending an appeal. Slater was heard in the High Court in Edinburgh on June 8, 1928, by 5 judges, and his murder conviction was quashed. Slater was given a compensation payment of £6,000, worth £750,000 now, for his wrongful arrest, and 19 years spent behind bars. However, the payment created a rift between Doyle and Slater. Doyle thought Slater was honor-bound to reimburse some of his supporters' expenses. But Slater didn't think the payment was enough compensation for the time he had spent in prison. After his release, he went to live in Ayr, and it was there that he died, aged 79, on January 31, 1948. So, who murdered Gilchrist? Doyle, like Trench, believed that it was a family member of the victim who did the wicked deed. One male relative had been heir to the spinster's £80,000 fortune, worth about £5.2 million today. But months before her death, Gilchrist changed her will, leaving her fortune instead to a former maid's family. One theory is that she was killed by a family member looking for the revised copy of the will that they hoped to destroy. One of them bore a resemblance to Slater. Despite Slater's reprieve, no one else was ever charged with Gilchrist's murder, and the mystery over the real killer's identity persists to this day.